maybe they've had an opportunity to head out a little bit earlier for their holiday weekend as well, which I can't blame them. The good thing is we're recording this. We'll distribute it back to you and the rest of the work group members. They'll be able to, hear our conversation and take it into account as they complete their review of the document. And just to remind you, that's kind of the purpose and where we are in the timeline of the work. We're in this kind of 2-week review period of the work group. And so this is a good touch point so that we can talk as a group and work and talk through the latest version of the principles and to get your feedback real time. Naturally, if you're not able to share everything that's on your mind, we'd welcome you to send us a follow-up email with additional thoughts, or to mark up the Word document that you received in your calendar invite and track changes or comment boxes, whatever is easiest for you to share what you're thinking about. But at any rate, we're going to start now. This is Dave Altstadt at JFF, and I'm joined by Lexi Barrett and Erica Cuevas. And we're glad to have you join us this Friday afternoon, at least, it's even afternoon West Coast time. So, Erica, if you want to flip to the next slide.
Yes. And I will add, I have muted folks while we give our presentation, but feel free if anyone has questions or want to chime in verbally, just unmute yourself. But I want to flag that folks are muted at this point.
And that might, I'm just looking at the call-in user 4. So everyone else looks like they're logged into WebEx, but whomever that person is, I don't know if they can unmute themselves.
Good question. That might be Sharon. Let me just.
Yes, it's me, and you can either mute me or I'll mute myself, whichever thing you want to do.
Okay, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sharon.
All righty, so in a moment we will unmute you all so we can do a quick round of introductions, but I just wanted to share the agenda today. So what we're going to do is do a quick recap of the principles, where we are now after our conversation in March and some follow-up discussion we had with the co-chairs, Sharon and Lee, and then invite them to just share their impressions, and then we'll open it up to the full group for feedback. We want to know what's resonating with you, what's missing, what are you hearing that you're struggling with and don't agree with kind of the direction we've headed. It's important that at this juncture that we surface all these things. The goal in this process is to reach a consensus among the work groups so that we can bring forth the best thinking to the full Policy Leadership Trust when they meet later on in July, and we work through all of the deep dive areas as a full group. The other two being College Promise and connecting students to careers. So that's where we're headed. Erica, if you want to, let me stop actually right now, and we'll just do a quick round of introductions, just so everyone knows who's on the call. So Sharon, maybe we'll just.
Sure, yes. This is Sharon Morrissey, Virginia Community College System.
This is Lee Goodson from Tulsa.
Joe Holliday, Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges.
Jacob Freire with the Texas Community College Association.
Great. Well, I think that's the group assembled. We have a few other members who weren't able to join us, or maybe will be joining us late. That's Julie Alexander from Miami-Dade, David Harrison from Columbus State, Jennifer Haygood, North Carolina Community College System, and Karen Stout, ATD. So we'll meet up with them if they're able to join, or we'll share the link with them. Erica, next slide. So just quick reminder, this is where we are in the process. I was kind of mentioning that before. We are really at this kind of consensus conversation period, review period of the work group with the goal of bringing this forward to the full trust, and then starting this fall, undertaking our kind of communications and advocacy work. I know that came up in our work group discussion in March, and we'll be sharing that draft plan with the trust and the ideas of who we meet with and how to bring forward these ideas at that point. So stay tuned for that part of the effort. Next slide. So just as a reminder, when we talk about consensus, what do we mean here and what's our decision-making process? So again, as I think I've mentioned before, we don't take kind of formal votes as a group, but rather we are looking to reflect the kind of prevailing views of the group. So it's important in this conversation, if you hear something that someone else has said and you agree with it, like a kind of a quick concur or agree or bring that up when you talk, that's just helpful to know where the overall views of the group is and where we're in agreement as individuals. And as our part of our process, we're coming back to you, with what it looks like now. We're going to make another series of edits depending on our feedback here and through the feedback period, and share that back with you again. Hopefully, at that point, it will sort of resonate completely, and we've kind of reached where we needed to get as a group. But certainly, even at that point, if there's something that's just still sticking with you, please do let us know. We want to make sure that we go into the summer meeting of the trust with the work group really feeling strongly about where they've ended up with this principal doc. Same goes with the other two groups. And then just finally, naturally, we realized that when I said prevailing views, that might mean that some of the ideas aren't, you as individuals may not agree with all the specific points, but they are generally in agreement of the group. And so just so you know, we do carry a disclaimer in our documents that make the point that, the positions of the Policy Leadership Trust do not necessarily reflect those of the individual members. So we hope that just gives you, a little bit of cover if necessary, if there's just something that the group decides to go with, but you personally don't agree with. So that's that in the decision-making process. I think I'm turning it over to Erica now to kind of take us from here, right?
Great, yes. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. This is Erica Cuevas. Good to see many of you and hear your voices as well. It's great to touch base again since our March work group meeting. So what I'm going to talk about now is the latest version of the principles document that the JFF team has drafted in response to the March work group meetings. We had some great discussion at that time, and I'm going to walk through some of the key elements of the current version of the draft. I will note that our team did meet with the co-chairs to share an additional version and an updated version with them. So we got some feedback initially from Sharon and Lee that we've incorporated into this new draft that you all have. One key piece of feedback that we had received was really being thoughtful about the language that we use in regards to ensuring that when we talk about dual enrollment programs, we are talking about college programs and college courses. So we decided that throughout the document, we had implemented and put in the term college and high school programs. That is a broad term that encompasses underneath that dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, and early college high schools. So for those who had a chance to review the document ahead of time, you'll see that throughout we continue to reference college and high school programs. Again, based on the feedback that we had received and really trying to make the point that when we're talking about dual enrollment, we are talking about college courses for high school students. And the college and high school programs is a broad term that we're seeing used regularly in the field that's been well accepted across various groups. So we'll pause there to see if maybe Lexi has anything to add about that term or our use throughout the document. All right.
No, nothing to add for me. That's helpful to note up front because you all will see that and might have had some questions about where that came from. So I think it's helpful to have that background.
Awesome. Great. So I'm just going to quickly walk through the different key elements again of the draft. So the first key element is focused on commitments. And what commitments refers to is essentially the musts that we see what policy should do when designing and implementing high-quality college and high school programs. So when you see commitments up front, that's the must of what, when we talk about policy, what policy should do and put forth. The second element that we have in the draft is an element focused on principles, and what principles do and what they refer to is what policies should do. So in the draft, these are overarching high-level principles, and then beneath each of those principles, you'll see additional detail and descriptions based on the conversation that we heard during the March work group meeting. So hopefully, for those who've had a chance to kind of review the document, the principles and the descriptions underneath them correctly and accurately reflect the discussions that we had. And then the third element that you'll see in the draft is in regards to policy levers. And what that refers to essentially is our considerations that we want to put forth, really looking at when we think about what the different various aspects policy can do, these are just considerations that states and maybe even at the federal level that policymakers should think about implementing. And during our work group meetings, we'll note that we didn't have a lot of time to really, with the full group, talk deeply and have a deep conversation about policy levers. So when we transition later in this webinar to getting everyone's feedback, definitely want to hear more of your thoughts and feedback specifically on the policy levers as well. But you'll see that we kind of grouped them into 3 to 4 main buckets of policy levers. For example, funding, implementation guidelines, governance, directives. And again, these are all actions that policy can get to and help with. And our thought behind the policy levers is that ultimately we don't want this to be an exhaustive list. So we really just want to highlight some key examples here. And the goal is to keep this document concise and clear. So again, we'd love your feedback on any policy levers that maybe you see missing or that are, some that are included that you'd like removed. We'll definitely love your feedback there. So those are the main key bucket areas in regards to the key elements in this draft. Again, the commitments, the musts of what policy should do, the principles refer to what should occur, and then we have the policy levers, which are the key considerations. And so based on the March work group meeting, the must and the commitment that we had heard really loud and clear throughout the discussion was a commitment to equity. So in the draft, you'll see there's two paragraphs there that really call out the commitment to uphold equity in college and high school programs. So we really wanted to call that out front and center. And we also had been hearing from the other 2 policy leadership work groups that they really liked the term commitment because they thought that that was a stronger term and strong language about what policy must consider and must have in place when thinking about these programs. So I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions, clarifying questions about definitions or what these key elements within the draft mean. So some folks may be on mute, so feel free to unmute yourself and chime in with questions, or also feel free to use the chat box as well.
So Erica, this is Jacob. 2 questions on the top of page 2, which is the beginning of the commitment section. First question is, as I read the totality of the document, then is there then included only one commitment, and that's a commitment to equity? That's the first question. And then the second question is, the word uphold to me assumes that equity already exists in some of these programs. And so, do we want to imply that commitment already exists? And do we want to uphold equity, or do we want to actually achieve equity?
That's a great question. In terms of your first question, Jacob, about there being listed here currently one commitment, it's open to the group if the group wants to list more than one commitment. Right now, there's just one focused on equity, but definitely the other work groups, I think, have maybe 2 to 3.
Yeah.
I think that's right, Dave.
They have 2 commitments. I mean, just one thing just to keep in mind. I mean, and equity is one of them. The other, as it turns out, is around kind of economic impact or economic advancement, talent development, that sort of thing. So what's the purpose of a college promise program? Or, I mean, certainly you can make that point around kind of career connections, but that's just something to think about. We didn't want to shoehorn dual enrollment and say that it has to be about talent development or economic advancement, but if you all want to think about that and want to make that strong statement, we'll certainly, we should certainly talk about it and consider whether that should be the other commitment that would be aligned with the other 2. And to your other point, the way that we talked about some equity in the other pieces, Jacob, is that, equity hasn't been achieved. We're trying to get there. We're trying to make an emphasis, a focus that this should be a primary goal or driver of the policy is to get to equity. So I think that stands. I think that's true in this too.
Yep, agreed.
Okay, so thank you for both of those clarifications. I think from my perspective, I'm fine for purposes of the dual credit piece or dual enrollment piece if we keep the top line commitment to equity as a way of focusing on that space. And then I think to your answer, David, with regards to the aspiration to achieve equity, I'd like for us to think about whether the word uphold assumes that it already exists across the board or even in some pockets. So just a question mark.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions at this point in regard to the commitments or the key elements of the document before we kind of dive deeper into going through each principle and the levers?
This is Joe. I agree with Jacob, and I'm even wondering if you need a verb there. It could just be a commitment to equity in college and high school programs.
Mm-hmm.
Just chiming in to agree with Jacob's comment.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say this is Julie. I'm so sorry I came in late.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie, I'm so glad you were able to get on. I know you were. So that's good.
Technology deficient is what I am, but thank you for sending it.
And I think I also saw Jennifer Haygood's on the line as well.
I have arrived. Sorry about my lateness as well.
So
Hi,
we're just working through the document and with the goal of seeking, your input on what's resonating, what's missing, what you may not agree with, so that we can work toward consensus as a group.
Sounds good.
Great. So I'm going to pass it over now to Lexi, who's going to walk us through the draft principles and also move into the levers as well.
Great. Thanks, Erica. And hello, everybody. It's so nice to have the opportunity to reconnect. And I'm super impressed with this group for so many of you showing up on the afternoon before Memorial Day weekend. So kudos to all of you. So as Erica noted, the principles are still one of the main cornerstones of the document. These were a lot of the pieces that we were workshopping together in March. And in here you can see the updated versions. I am going to kind of run through all of them, and then we can talk about them as a totality after, though certainly you can go back once we finish up to to ask questions or have comments about each one individually, but wanted to kind of run through all of them so that you can get a sense of where we landed. So we ended up with 5 principles, which I know is a number that we were looking to get to, so hopefully this hits the mark. So the first one is pathways. And what we say there, you all have the document, but I'll just read the bolded sentences for us to call out. So for pathways, we say college and high school programs should be designed around thoughtful, structured, and aligned pathways that lead to equitable outcomes for students, including persistence into college, attainment of post-secondary credentials of value, successful transfer, and successful entry into the workforce. And then you'll see for each of these, after kind of the bolded top line principle, we have a little bit more explanation where we wanted to give a little sense of the working group and why each of these principles came to the fore and what part of the angle was. So that's the pathways one. The second one was navigations and supports, and that's where we say all high school students, especially underrepresented and low-income students, should receive early and sustained advising and academic support to prepare for and engage in college and high school programs, as well as to progress and to complete college. The next one is funding. College and high school programs should have sustainable, consistent funding structures to ensure cost is not a barrier for students and that public secondary and post-secondary partners receive the needed resources to support high-quality programs. The fourth is data, where we say data systems and protocols should be created or connected that define, count, and understand the outcomes of high school students in college and high school programs so that systems can understand if intended outcomes are being met, particularly for underrepresented and low-income students. And finally, on quality and rigor, we say college and high school programs should be authentic college experiences that are equivalent to college courses in any other setting in curriculum, materials, rigor, assessments, and instructor credentials. So one of the things I would note throughout all of these that we tried to do based on our conversation in March is, in addition to having equity as the commitment up top, to also work to weave in the importance of equity as a focus throughout many of these principles as well. So you'll see some of that language in each of the top lines. Erica, you can go to the next slide. So then, as Erica talked about, we have the policy levers, and we work to group these under each into some generalized categories, such as funding, implementation guidelines, governance directives. And so you see here, for each of them, we had, not all of them had something in each category. They were different. As Eric noted, we really didn't want to try and make this be a fully exhaustive list, but rather a set of considerations that states should keep in mind. So that's why this ended up that way. So for each of these, you can see under pathways, navigation, sports, and funding, we have policy levers that we've suggested for each. And then the next slide, you can see the last two. So for data and quality and rigor, we have policy levers related to funding, capacity building, directives, and then funding, directives, and governance. And these higher level policy lever categories are things that we work to carry through with the other work groups as well, to try and put some kind of bounding around the sorts of policy issue areas we were talking about. All right, Eric, you can go to the next slide. So we'll pause there now. We're really eager to get everyone's feedback on what we put together here. As Erica and Dave both noted, we have this opportunity for conversation, but you should not view this as like your final last word, because you'll definitely have the opportunity to send us additional thoughts as some of this conversation settles in, and especially some of the more kind of line edit and word suggestions. But before we turn to the full group, we'd love to give an opportunity for Sharon or Lee as our co-chairs if there are kind of any general impressions or thoughts that you wanted to share with the group before we dive in further.
Well, this is Sharon. I'll start. I want to thank Lexi and Erica particularly for, and David for giving us a chance. Lee and I had the opportunity to receive the draft ahead of time, and we had conference calls to sort of dig into some of the wording. thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do that. Words matter, and we all are, I think we've all come to agreement on what it is we're trying to say, and now in the wordsmithing part of this work, how we say it really matters. And I think Erica and Lexi have done a tremendous job capturing what we said during our full day meeting, pulling together all those disparate ideas and thoughts, coalescing all of that into a cohesive document. But I really appreciate all of your great work, but I also encourage the other committee members, now that you have the draft, to please chime in when you think something could be said in a different way or needs more emphasis, because we want this document to be as compelling as possible at the end of the day when we present it, I guess, in July. So again, thanks to everybody for your efforts to make this document happen.
Great, thanks, Sharon.
Maybe Lee can't unmute herself. Oh, there you go.
There. Okay. This is Lee, and I just I agree with everything Sharon said. There were just the document was in such great shape by the time we got it. There were a few comments that I was able to make, and those have been integrated in, and I think just a little bit of further consensus discussion by the other members will just make it that much better. But I'm really pleased with the direction that the product is going.
Great. All right, I'll turn it back to Erica to help us facilitate additional conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Lexi, and also big thank you to Sharon and Lee. We really appreciate your support in all this work and all of the pre-work that you helped with in reviewing the initial redraft, providing input, and now we're able to talk with the full group and get everyone else's input and their thoughts. So definitely want, like Sharon had mentioned, to encourage everyone else to chime in and let us know your thoughts. We have some prompting questions here, and we'll open it up here shortly, but we want to hear, what resonates most with you, what's missing from the document. Maybe there are something that was brought up in the March meeting that was very important that maybe is not reflected in this document. Please let us know if there's anything missing. And also, we want to hear if there's anything included that you don't agree with. Again, we want this document to be reflective of all of your thoughts and something that the group feels comfortable with moving into the July Policy Leadership Trust meeting as well. So those are just some prompting questions. At this point, we'll open it up to anyone to kind of provide feedback. So feel free to unmute yourself, and also you can type in comments in the chat box. And following this conversation as well via email and another draft, there's another opportunity to provide input as well.
So this is Jacob. Let me jump in. And Lexi and Erica and David, first of all, let me just say, I realize that I'm an invited guest, and so I don't want to get uninvited, so I'll go easy into this. But I very much appreciate the work that was put together. This is an excellent document. I have immersed myself in this space probably the better part of the last 36 months, and this kind of frames very eloquently the scope of the issues that I think we've been focusing on and that should be focused on across the states with our colleagues. So I like it. I like the way it's framed, and I appreciate really the focus of the issues. I'm probably going to offer a couple of observations that are more questions than observations, and then a few more maybe framing suggestions, and to the extent that that's kosher for this conversation. I think that with regards to maybe a question for us is it seems to me that the the commitment statement, and we talked about the appropriate focus of that, and the principles are all very germane, and the policy leaders, I think, are very appropriate and all that. It seems to me that the paper is still silent on whether or not JFF or whether or not the signatories therein are, in fact, advocating or urging an expansion of dual credit, dual enrollment opportunities as a way of achieving the commitment that we talked about. It seems to me that there's absent in it sort of a declarative statement, one way or the other, that this is a viable method for achieving educational opportunities, particularly for low-income disadvantaged students. So that's a question. I don't know that I'm recommending that we put it into, but that's a question for us to consider. I think the second thing, this is maybe a question that we struggle with here in Texas, and I'm asking it here for us to think it through, is that if we do believe that the dual enrollment, dual credit, or college and high school modality of instruction is something that we would want to see in the academy and higher ed, then we ask ourselves three questions, and I've only been able to at least answer one of the three at this juncture, is what's the threshold that makes sense for the individual student unit? In other words, what should be the ideal number of semester credit hours that a student should graduate from high school under their belt? And I don't know that we have an answer to that, but it's a big range. In Texas, the average number of credits that a high school graduates with is 15. And some might argue that that's low, and some might argue that that's high, but it's a question that we ask ourselves. The second question that we ask ourselves is what should be that threshold at the institutional level? If you are an academic institution, and all of the colleges are, then at what level of your total enrollment that is now comprised of high school students taking college courses is that threshold sort of change the elements of that institution? Second question. Third question is at the state level, what's the threshold of the state's high school population that we would aspire to have some level of college credit upon graduation? And so for us, the average high school student has 15 credit hours. For us, I have some of my colleges that are north of 40% of their total enrollment, FTE, are in dual credit, and I have some of my colleges that are still in the, not single digits, but single teen digits, 10, 11 percentile. And then as a state, I think we just now are at 21.5% of high school graduates now have some level of dual credit under their belt. So those are questions that I posed for you all to consider, whether or not we even want to make some kind of recommendations on those goals. Those are the two bigger things. I think with regards to the format, I know this is a policy piece, and I appreciate it as a policy piece, but it may also lend itself to an institutional policy piece. So I wonder whether there's room in your structure to provide an exemplar. Is there an exemplar institution in any one of these principles that we called out? Is there an exemplar state policy in any one of these principles that we called out? Just because if there is, then I for one, I want to go the right way and see what is it. If we're calling out intentional structuring of the co-enrollment into guided pathways, then what state is doing that well now, so that I can go there and figure that out and see what that looks like. So those are put out as sort of funny suggestions, but I think not absolutely necessary, but if it's there, that's great. And in that same light, I know the reference that you have on page 1 to the OCR study with regard to the representation of people of color, underrepresented students in dual enrollment. I would love to see you guys have access to a state-by-state comparison. So I would love to know how Texas is doing in comparison to other states in that very specific in that very specific metric. And I think, let me check one more thing. And I think just lastly, if you're not already doing this, I would love to see a resource section at the very end. A resource section that quickly gives me hyperlinks to the latest research, or the research that at least tends to address one or more of these principles that were mentioned in the top. That's it.
This is Joe. I just want to make one brief comment while it's fresh in people's minds based on Jacob's comments about those state level ideas. And I'm just wondering, for the sake of discussion now or later, whether those actually could be integrated into the policy levers areas under directives. Maybe it's not just directives, but directives and targets.
Great, thanks. Any other either reflections and responses to Joe and Jacob's suggestions, or other kind of thoughts, questions that this brought up?
Julie. This
yeah,
is
go ahead.
Julie, and so I'm contemplating the commentary about proportion of participation, proportion of enrollment, both at the state and the institution level. And my initial inclination is that in this document, we wouldn't want to pin that down, but maybe there's something to some kind of suggestion that as states, institutions are contemplating dual enrollment, that's just like with, it's a component of enrollment management at the institution level, and so that would be something very obvious that would be a part of the planning process. But I don't know if we want to say, okay, 25%, I just think pinning us down, we're not there yet, in my opinion. If that's what you had in mind, I'm not sure.
I took from kind of Jacob's point that do we want to come out as a group kind of stating that we think, dual enrollment should vastly expand or should be a cornerstone of post-secondary attainment, that, a statement around its use toward a pathway to a degree. That's an interesting and open question, and we should have that discussion. The way I was looking at this document was more of some quality standards of, we're saying this is happening and these should be the elements. If you're going to do dual enrollment, you should do these things to ensure equity, to ensure students are on a path to a credential of value, and that we're upholding quality, throughout. That's the way I looked at it, but which is a little different than a document that expressly makes the point that this is the strategy for that we want to make a statement around that this should be the way forward.
This is Jennifer. I think I conceived of this paper similar to you, David. And if we wanted to go in the direction of making any statement about dual enrollment being, I guess, something that should be expanded or should be foundational, I would think that we would also need to have included in the document research that clearly shows how it has improved attainment. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I totally agree with that. And I think that, again, so you guys took the commentary about the proportionate share a little differently than I do, and I can see it from that perspective too. I think that that's a very strong statement if we want to go in that direction. And this document seems more guidance than leaning towards sort of a more official stand. If that makes sense.
This is Joe. I'll jump into the void here again. I just wanted to make one specific comment under Principle 1. And as I read it, I realized that it really beautifully argues for college and high school to be along a career path and to matter and to count. But I'm a former career counselor, so full disclosure. So I'm just wondering if we've overstated that case, because is there a role for career exploration in college and high school? So I guess I'll just be brief here and just ask that question.
Yes.
Repeat your question one more time.
So this is Joe again. I wonder if we have made too strong a case for how college and high school needs to be related to a career pathway, and I'm asking, shouldn't there be a place for career exploration in college and high school programs, which I don't think this very strong and really well written policy principle statement does not seem to have room for.
But what would career exploration look like to you?
It would be a student testing out a career interest by taking a class or two, but let's just say a class in a career area the student is exploring.
This is Sharon. I think, Joe, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if we could include that idea somewhere in number 2, where we talk about navigation and student supports. Because we speak to advising and academic supports there, and under number 2, we talk about attainment of post-secondary credentials with labor market value. I wonder if somewhere just within the paragraph that's already there, we could include wording about career exploration or career counseling. I don't know how you want to phrase it.
Yeah, I would say career exploration. Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, it's interesting. We are a state that is embracing guided pathways and scaling up dramatically after our recent legislative session. We struggle with this in the context of guided pathways. You know, do we even have career exploration pathways, exploratory pathways, or do we need students to be choosing a meta-major, a program of study and following that? So it's a larger issue for us, and that's probably why it was on my mind as I was reading the document.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Joe, and it's definitely a conversation that comes up a lot in the CTE context. Obviously, that there's sort of the push-pull between allowing for the exploration, but also making sure that the credits and courses being taken are aligned with something. But I think most of the folks I know that are working on CTE-focused dual enrollment would definitely agree with you that one of the important things that it can serve is to help someone explore a potential career path, even if then they make a different decision after doing that exploration. But that exploration should be, I think you can make an argument that those courses should still be, there's a thoughtful design that's incorporated in that too, right? But I think Sharon's right that there's probably somewhere in here that we can reflect that more, because I think it's a good point and definitely something that I feel like I hear, it resonates with me from what I've heard from the field.
Great, so we're almost at time, about 10 minutes left, so definitely want to make sure we get everyone's thoughts and feedback on the principles and levers. So anything else that hasn't been said yet?
And we can also, in follow-up to this, because I know there were kind of a couple higher level kind of questions and provocations raised, we can summarize them in a follow-up email too, because I assume it might be some of those things folks just might want to marinate on a little longer, and maybe we can do some of that back and forth over email, or you can kind of forward us your thoughts after. So we can summarize a few of those kind of key questions that have come up during the discussion too, along with obviously any kind of line edits or word suggestions to the document itself.
This is Joe. One other quick one. It's under number 5, under governance, policy levers. I think we discussed, but I'll just mention the idea of convening faculty in a cross-sector, convening cross-sector faculty, not just a statewide task force, but actually getting faculty together across sectors.
Great.
Erica, was there an intention to rank order the 5 principles?
No.
It's a great question.
Okay.
No.
Do you think there should be? There could be. There was not an intention. They were random.
Sometimes I think sometimes lay people like me will imply there is a rank order. I guess I should say I get impatient after a while, so I just go to the top recommendation, and I wonder whether the group would be amenable to moving up, even if there's no rank order, to moving up the principle on sustaining rigor.
Mm-hmm.
This is Sharon. I think that's a great suggestion. I hadn't even thought about the implication of putting numbers on these principles, and numbers matter because they imply rank order. So I think that's a very good suggestion.
Great. Any last thoughts to share with the group? And I loved Lexi's idea of we'll definitely summarize sort of these key questions that have been raised throughout the discussion, and we'll shoot that out to the group for folks to continue considering and thinking about, and we can have that discussion online.
Erica, this is Lee. so we'll have one more discussion, or will this is our next discussion? We have one more discussion before we meet with the policy trust, right?
That is a great question. Let me go to the next slide. That
Can we
sort of
kind of
outline what's
okay. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I'll just chime in here. I mean, I think maybe it's up to the group, but we were looking at this as the touch point way during the comment period. So we want to, encourage you to, over the next week until June 3rd, to share additional feedback via email or marking up the document, at which point we'll make another round of kind of edits to reflect the conversation and then share it back. Our next step would be to share it back to Sharon and Lee as kind of stewards of the group, first off, to get their sense of whether we've reflected. We'll share the feedback we got and how we how we addressed it in the next version, and then send it to the group to say this is where we landed. Now, I would say to Sharon and Lee, if you think we need another touch point, like, we would look to your guidance about that, but we don't necessarily have that in the timeline. There will naturally be another discussion in July as the full group, as the full trust meets. There'll be a appointed time, about an hour or two or so. I got to look back at the agenda where we'll be talking about dual enrollment. So
Yeah.
another feedback loop and all this. But ideally, we go into that conversation with the work group pretty well firmed up in what they want to present to the full group.
I think that what you've just described there, David, is reasonable.
Okay.
Does the group have a feeling on that? I mean, I think people have piped up in this meeting. And then, Julie, it looks like you have some wording tweaks in addition to the comments you had today, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very minor, very minor.
Yeah. I think, Sharon, if you're comfortable with that and the group's comfortable, I think that's fine. I just want us to all kind of know where we're headed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions about next steps and what's to come from anyone?
Thank you for all your work.
Yeah, well, thank you all. We appreciate you hopping on again on a Friday afternoon right before a holiday weekend. So we wish you all a great restful weekend, and you'll be hearing from us soon. And yes, you'll have some additional more days to provide us feedback via email. Feel free to send us track changes or additional questions, but we will follow up.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.